This sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster, but it's not. It's real life. For the very first time in modern history, the United States has captured the sitting president of another country. So today, we're going to dig into how and why U.S. forces just took Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro into custody. So picture this. It's the middle of the night, early on January 3rd, 2026. Suddenly, the capital of Venezuela, Caracas, is rocked by a series of massive explosions. People are hearing aircraft overhead, and soon, images of fire are popping up all over social media, centered on Fuerte Tuna, the country's main military base. And in all that chaos, a wild rumor starts to spread.
And then, bam, the confirmation comes from Washington, and it is just jaw-dropping. Nicolás Maduro, the president of Venezuela, has been captured by U.S. forces. He's been flown out of his own country. A sitting head of state is now an American prisoner.
So let's talk about the operation itself. This thing was fast. It was surgical, carried out by the best of the best, elite U.S. Delta Force operators. But their main target wasn't just Maduro. They also made sure to grab the person who many insiders say was the real power behind the throne. And that person is Cilia Flores, Maduro's wife. But calling her the First Lady doesn't even begin to cover it. She's a lawyer, a major political player since the days of Hugo Chavez, and insiders call her the regime's political brain. She was the strategist, the one who built and maintained the networks that kept her husband in power. Okay, so how on earth does the U.S. justify something this radical? Well, officially, the White House isn't calling this an act of war. Nope. They're framing it as a massive, large-scale law enforcement operation. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, well, she did not mince words. She painted the picture of Maduro and Flores as nothing more than international criminals who were about to face an American jury. So what are the actual charges here? What could possibly lead to an operation this extreme? All right, so the indictment, which was filed in New York, lays out some really heavy charges. We're talking about leading a narco-terrorist partnership with groups like the FARC, all with the goal of flooding the United States with cocaine. The U.S. is alleging they used the power of the state to basically turn Venezuela into a criminal enterprise. Now, this didn't just happen out of the blue. When you look back over the last year and a half, you can see the dominoes falling, one by one. It really started when the U.S. refused to recognize Maduro's 2024 election win. Then came the terrorist designations for his alleged cartel, and the final piece of the puzzle, a massive increase in the reward for his capture. Each step was a turn of the screw. And that reward? It wasn't just a small bump. The U.S. State Department jacked it up to a staggering $50 million. That move was a huge signal. It basically put a massive state-sponsored price on a sitting president's head. And that right there, that brings us to the absolute heart of the international firestorm this has kicked off. Is this a justified law enforcement action, as the U.S. claims, or is it something else entirely, an illegal act of war? Yeah, once you step outside the U.S., the story changes dramatically. Around the world, legal experts are sounding the alarm, calling this a dangerous moment where global norms just got shattered. You've got legal scholars, guys like former U.S. Attorney Jimmy Groulet, and they are not holding back. Their argument is pretty simple. You just can't do this. You can't send your military into another sovereign country to kidnap its leader, no matter what you accuse them of. So where is this coming from? Well, it's rooted in something called Article 2.4 of the United Nations Charter. And you have to understand, this isn't just some dusty old rule. It's like the foundational rule of the entire international system, put in place to stop powerful countries from just attacking their neighbors. Critics are saying the U.S. just tore that rulebook to shreds. This whole thing sets up an absolutely fascinating legal showdown. On one side, you have this core principle of international law called head of state immunity. Basically, a nation's leader can't be put on trial in another country's courts. But on the other side, the U.S. has its own kind of wild legal principle called the Kerr-Frisbee Doctrine. It basically says, hey, we don't care how we got him here. Now that he's here, we can prosecute him. These two fundamental ideas are about to crash into each other. To really get a grip on what just happened, you have to look at the history here. Because, believe it or not, this isn't the first time the U.S. has used its military to snatch a leader in Latin America. The most famous example, of course, is Panama's Manuel Noriega back in 1989. But here's the thing. When you put the two operations side by side, you see just how much more aggressive this Venezuela mission really was. Back in '89, the U.S. could at least point to the fact that Panama had declared a state of war, and they argued that thousands of American lives were in danger. Fast forward to today with Maduro, none of that exists. The only public justification is a criminal indictment. This kind of thinking, this idea of U.S. intervention, it goes way, way back. We're talking 1904. President Teddy Roosevelt comes out with what's called his Corollary. It basically said, hey, the U.S. is the cop on the beat for the Western Hemisphere, and we have the right to intervene whenever and wherever we see a problem. And now, some analysts are starting to talk about a new version of that for the 21st century, the Trump Corollary. The idea is that modern problems, things like mass migration and organized crime, are now being used as the new justification for U.S. military intervention and for asserting American dominance in the region. So what now? What happens next? The truth is, by capturing a president, the U.S. has just thrown a grenade into the whole system of international law. The political and legal chaos is really just getting started. And we need to be crystal clear about this. Legally speaking, this isn't really up for debate. Under the Geneva Conventions, when one state takes a hostile action like this against another, it automatically creates what's called an international armed conflict, what you and I would call war. As a matter of law, the United States and Venezuela are now at war. And that legal status isn't just words on paper. It triggers some immediate, really massive consequences. It means the Geneva Conventions are in full effect. It means Maduro and his wife could be considered prisoners of war. Venezuelan citizens living in the U.S. now have special protections. And maybe the most explosive consequence of all. Under international law, Venezuela now has the legal right to use military force against the U.S. in self-defense. And as if things weren't chaotic enough, you have this absolutely wild statement from President Trump, this declaration that the U.S. is going to run the country. Well, it raises the possibility of a full-blown, long-term U.S. military occupation, which would itself be illegal and have unbelievable consequences for the entire hemisphere. And so it all comes down to this one huge question. The action in Venezuela has shattered a century of rules about how countries are supposed to behave. It challenges the basic idea that nations get to be in charge of their own affairs. In a world where one country can just decide to go in and grab the leader of another, what rules are even left? And what does the future of the world we live in even look like?